Hello, Brahms. We're back with The Golem Remembered, 1909 to 1980, Variations of a Jewish Legend by Arnold Goldsmith. Let's hope I don't read as poorly as I did last night. In my defense, I was drinking beers. Although the above is only a brief summation of some of the highlights of Rabbi Loews' thoughts, it indicates the venerable scholar's connection to Renaissance humanism. With his emphasis on the centrality of individual experience in man's quest for truth, his belief in the importance of educating the poor man as well as the rich, his shifting away from the sterile pedagogy of traditional Talmudic study to the broader elements of Jewish education. Judah Loews stands as Boxer says in the concluding statement of his book, as a Jewish representative in the movement of transition from medieval to modern times. More important to the purpose of this study is Thieberger's conclusion in evaluating the range of Judah Loews' thought. By combining in his mental outlook, and no doubt also in his daily life, mysticism with realism, Loews became enveloped in an aura of magic, which not only greatly impressed posterity, but also provided it with that great legendary character it needed in its longing for redemption. The legendary creator of the Golem, with the image of the historical Judah Loews, Renaissance scholar, rabbi mystic in the background, it is possible to address the question of how the legend of the Golem of Prague became identified with this man over 100 years after his death. Perhaps the final answer will never be known, but Thieberger has put together enough pieces of the puzzle to show the way future scholars will have to go solve the mystery. The explanation begins with the decision in the early 18th century to write the Loews family chronicle. Because the tombstone over the graves of Judah and Pearl Loews, who was 104 when she died, had deteriorated and sunk into the ground over the years, it was restored in 1724 with contributions from the rabbi's descendants and admirers. At the same time, some of the descendants decided to collect reminiscences of the family and to fix the actual line of descent. The strong Kabbalistic movement then prevailing, combined with the fascination exercised by Jonathan Ebeschutz on the youth of Prague, brought to the fore once again the memory of the great master of the Agada. Many pilgrims visited the now restored grave, and the great Rabbi Loews gradually became the central figure of a whole series of legends. It is important to remember that Meyer Perlis makes no mention of the Golem or any of the other legends in the Megalath Yukusin Megillith Yakith. All right, so much for not butchering and botching the text here. According to Thieberger, the first indication of Rabbi Loews' supernatural activity appears in 1709, just 100 years after his death. Rabbi Loews' great-great-grandson, Naphtali Cohen, a rabbinical authority in correspondence with Rabbi Zvi Chacham over a religio-juridical question, referred to his ancestor, the Maharal of Prague, who, as is well known, made use of the Holy Spirit. Rabbi Chacham printed this letter in his collection of Responsa. Another of Rabbi Loews' descendants, Yair Bacharach, claimed that he owned one of the Maharal's amulets. Maharal's amulets. But this time, says Thieberger, reports about the Kabbalistic activity of the great rabbi were freely circulated, although the Golem does not seem to have been included in them. In the 18th century, Prague became a center for Kabbalistic study. Jonathan Ebenschutz, and Naphtali Cohen were but three of the leading Kabbalists living there. Thieberger remarks that between 1710 and 1730, the great Rabbi Loew became more and more a central figure of Kabbalistic legend, but his connection with the legends of the Golem cannot be dated earlier than 1730. The earliest legends about Rabbi Loew are probably those connected with definite places in Prague. For example, the only hint of the supernatural in the family chronicles is the story Perlis tells about the death of the rabbi's favorite grandson, Samuel, in 1666. According to this story, the Maharal had promised the grandson a place next to his own grave. When the dying Samuel called the wardens of the burial society to inform them of his promise, they argued that the space was too narrow. Upon Samuel's death, however, the wardens re-inspected the spot and discovered that the tomb had moved to make room for the new grave. After Samuel's burial in the desired spot, the space grew smaller again, until 1847. This legend of Rabbi Loew is the only one which we find in writing. The stories were only transmitted orally, and many must have been lost or been changed from their original form in the process. Gradually, some of the material from the oral sources found its way into print, such as new editions of the Perlis family chronicles and collections of tales and stories by Slavic and other writers. The most important of these collections was Sipurim, a book of popular tales about the ghetto brought out in 1847 by Wolf Pascheles, a Prague publisher. This collection includes C. Ludwig Kapper's Great Rabbi Loew and the Count, which combines incidents from legends by Weissel and others and shows how they developed almost 250 years after the rabbi's death. Most important to this study, the legend of the Golem of Prague appeared for the first time in print in this collection. Since Thieberger thinks that the Golem legend, the most famous of all those about Rabbi Loew, arose only after most of the others about the Maharal, it seems fitting to review the others first. Kapper's tale in Sipurim is a good place to begin, since it illustrates the fascination with alchemy, astrology, and the Kabbalah. According to this legend, a Bohemian aristocrat who loved alchemy and astrology often visited Rabbi Loew to discuss secret sciences. When the Count expressed surprise at the rabbi's apparent ability to accommodate 400 disciples in a small house, Rabbi Loew invited him and his many friends and attendants to a lavish dinner. The Count was stunned by the discrepancy between the outside of the rabbi's home and the opulent interior. During the sumptuous banquet, the Count signaled to one of his attendants, who then stole the gold cup before the guests left. Shortly after the visit, the Count heard of the strange story of a castle 200 miles from Prague, which had suddenly vanished, only to reappear intact the next day with all of its valuables, accounted for but one gold cup. Convinced that Rabbi Loew had used magic despite his frequent denials, the Count insisted that the rabbi teach him the secrets of the Kabbalah. Rabbi Loew at first refused, but upon the threat of death for him and his family, he asked permission to send for his friend from Spain, Don Abraham, to instruct the Count. To Rabbi Loew's surprise, his friend arrived that very Friday without having been sent for, because he had had a dream revealing the Maharal's plight. As the lessons were about to begin in the Count's black-draped room, Don Abraham explained that only completely innocent people can be initiated into the mysteries of Kabbalah. When he asked the Count if he met these qualifications, and the Count lied in the affirmative, Don Abraham ordered the nobleman to look behind him, where he recognized his dead sister with her child in her arms. The apparitions disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared, and Don Abraham revealed, "That was your sister, and your child, and her, your child. You yourself have destroyed them." The Count, overwhelmed with guilt, confessed his crime, asked the two men to keep a secret, and allowed Rabbi Loew and his friend to return to Prague. In Bloch's retelling of this legend, he bowdlerizes the obvious reference to incest and makes the Count guilty only of the pair's murder. Variations of this legend appear in Sipparim, one of which tells how the emperor, with Tycho Brahe, visited Rabbi Loew in the ghetto. In this version, the rabbi conjured up the castle of Haradshin. In Pictures of My Boyhood, 1872, Al Kalish says that his grandmother told him a similar story in which Rabbi Loew conjured up a summer garden for the emperor, even though it was winter. Thieberger points out that similar legends were told about the great Christian theologian Albertus Magnus in the 13th century. In the 16th century, such legends expressed the longing of an age in which the practical application of the Kabbalah was rampant. In another legend about Rabbi Loew, found in Sipparim and also mentioned by Alois Jurassic in his Old Bohemian Tales, 1914, the emperor asked the Maharal to conjure up the patriarchs and sons of Jacob so that he could see what they looked like. Rabbi Loew was reluctant to do so, but consented on the condition that the emperor not laugh no matter what he saw. On the day of the magic show, the emperor was awed by the apparitions before him. Unfortunately, when Jacob's son appeared in Naphtali, the hind let loose, as he is called in Jacob's blessing, jumped across the ears of corn and flax stalks in order to catch up with the others. The emperor forgot his promise and started to laugh. Suddenly, the apparitions faded, and the ceiling of the emperor's apartment began to collapse. Only a command from the Maharal saved the day. According to Thieberger, even though today there is a room in the castle closed to the public because the ceiling has given away, even today there is a room. Okay, did I say even though? In the 1920 silent film, in the silent German film Der Golem, wie in die Welt kam, Paul Wegener directed this scene with stunning visual effects. The Golem does appear in Jurassic's tale, or the one in Sipparim does not appear. All right, I'm butchering it again. Let's calm ourselves. Jurassic tells another legend which testifies to the great impression made on the Jewish community by Emperor Rudolph's one audience with Rabbi Loew, and how the great Rabbi Loew met King Rudolph for the first time. In this legend, Rabbi Loew forced himself on the king, who had ordered the expulsion of the Jews from Prague. While the rabbi was waiting for the king's carriage to pass on a stone bridge, the people threw stones and dirt at him, but the missiles turned to flowers. When the carriage with the royal procession arrived, the horses stopped of their own volition. It would not run over the Maharal. Only then did the flower-bedecked rabbi bare his head, kneel before the king, and ask for mercy for the Jews. Favorably impressed, Rudolph invited Rabbi Loew to his castle, rescinded his decree, and thereafter invited the Maharal to visit him often. This legend never appears in Rosenberg or Bloch, but it does appear in Byron L. Sherwin's article, Rabbi Loew and the Golem. He simply calls it a Bohemian legend, never mentioning Jurassic. I'm going to say Jurassic instead of Jurassic, although it probably is Jurassic. Rosenberg probably omitted it because it had nothing to do with the Golem. Bloch may never have heard or read it. One of the most interesting of the tales in Sipparim, which Thieberger includes in the last section of his book, The Bellalist Lane, does not appear in Rosenberg or Bloch. Again, Rosenberg may have omitted it because it does not involve the Golem. Bloch, on the other hand, may have excluded it because of its sexual implications. The story tells how a plague broke out among the Jews of Prague during the reign of Rudolph II. Only very young children were its victims. As the corpses piled up, it was assumed that God was punishing the Jewish community for some transgression. Special prayers, fasts, and learned discussions were to no avail. Learned, I suppose it means. One night, one of the rabbis, on account of his great wisdom and his knowledge of the Talmud, the Kabbalah, astronomy, and astrology, was given a clue in a dream. This man, of course, was the Maharal, and in his dream, Elijah led him to the cemetery, where he saw the children's corpses rise from their graves. The next day, the rabbi sent for one of his bravest disciples and told him to go to the cemetery at midnight, pull off one of the children's shrouds, and bring it to him. When the clock struck 12 and the children's spirits began doing their strange dances, the terrified disciple followed his instructions and ran back to the rabbi. At this point, Rabbi Loews saw outside the window the phantom of a naked child floating rapidly towards him. The narrator then explains that when the clock struck 1 and the specters finished their dance, one child noticed that his shroud was missing and he could not return to the grave. He pleaded with Rabbi Loews to give back his shroud, but the Maharal refused until the phantom revealed the cause of the plague. In a street not far from the rabbi, it said, there lived 2 married couples who led an immoral life with their wives. This made God so angry that he had launched this plague on the Jewish settlement. The rabbi then returned the shroud to the child. The legend ends with the rabbis punishing the 2 couples, whose specific behavior is never disclosed, and the plague ceases. The last line is a belated attempt to add a little verbal comic relief to this somber tale. It explains that the lane where the 2 couples lived was given by the people the name of Bella-Lis Lane, derived from the names of the 2 wives, Bella and Ella. The last 2 legends to be mentioned here, not involving the Golem, concern the death of Rabbi Loews. Both, according to Thieberger, antedate the Golem legend and age of a purely Kabbalistic mystical character. Or is that supposed to be R of a purely Kabbalistic? I don't know. The first, based on an oral tradition in Poland, appears in Sagan and Erzählungen aus der Provinz, Posen, 1893, by the Christian scholar Koop, and in Judah Bergman's Legenden der Juden, 1919. It tells how Rabbi Loews went to the synagogue in Posen one night before the Jewish New Year to investigate a light. Dude, I gotta read this much more. He had seen from his house. In the synagogue, he discovered a strange being sharpening his knife before a long list of names. The frightened rabbi ran away at first, but then realized that the stranger was the angel of death contemplating the list of those about to die from the plague. He quickly returned to the synagogue and tore the list from his hands. When he got home and read the list, he discovered the names of Posen's most eminent Jews, but the fragment that remained in the angel's hands contained the name of Rabbi Loews. After the High Holy Days, the Maharal died. The second legend, which originated in Prague, was told by Jurasik and retold by Israel Gunzig in Die Wunder manner im Judischen Volk, 1921. It was about the difficulty the angel of death had in catching up with the great Rabbi Loews. The angel succeeded only when he hid himself in the fragrance of a rose brought to the Maharal by his favorite granddaughter. It is this legend which inspired the sculptor Ladislas Salaun to create the monument to Rabbi Loews, which can be seen in Prague in front of the new town hall. In Jurasik's version, it is the rabbi's wife who brings him the rose to remind him of his youthful happiness. As popular as were all these legends about Rabbi Loews, the most famous of all was the one about the Golem, which, as Thieberger has explained, seems to have come after most of the others were well known. No other legend was so intimately connected in the popular mind with the person of the great Rabbi Loews as the one about the Golem, and all later legends would not have omitted to use this motif whenever it was possible. There are Golem legends about other miracle workers before and after Rabbi Loews, but none became so widely spread as that of the Golem of Prague. In his prefatory note to the first printed version of the Golem of Prague legend in Siparim in 1847, L. Weissel explains, all the following legends I heard from the old people, and I pass them on to the kind reader as I have received them. With admirable economy and no attempt at artistic embellishment, Weissel tells the story of the creation and removal of the Golem in a little over 350 words. Of considerable importance is the fact that he never mentions the blood libel, the false accusation brought against the Jews, usually claiming that they have killed a Christian child and drained his blood for use in their baking their unleavened bread, matzot, at the time of Passover. Wiesel's omission of this accusation supports Gershom Shalom's contention that this motif is a modern invention. Despite his economy of words, Wiesel could not resist a little wistful editorializing. After telling how his knowledge of Kabbalah enabled Rabbi Loew to make a golem, Wiesel adds, thanks to this art, he was able to put life into figures formed from clay and wood, and to make them perform whatever they were told to do, just as if they were real beings. Such self-created servants are worth a great deal. They neither eat nor drink, nor do they require any wages. They work patiently. One can scold them, and they do not answer back. In Wiesel's version, Rabbi Loew put the Shem, God's name, into the golem's mouth and removed it every Sabbath, which was the golem's one day of rest. When he forgot to remove it one Friday, the magic servant went wild. He pulled down houses, threw about lumps of rock, tore out trees by the roots, and played havoc in the streets. A little suspense is added by the narrator, who asks how the golem was to be stopped, since the Sabbath had supposedly begun. With its prohibition against all work, whether constructive or destructive, the problem was easily solved, however, since the Sabbath had not yet been sanctified. In the Alt's New Synagogue, which was the official guide on such matters, Rabbi Loew ran outside, pulled the Shem from the golem's mouth, and the lump of clay fell down and broke into pieces. The rabbi was greatly upset by this occurrence and was unwilling to create another such dangerous servant. Apparently, it is still a tradition in the Alt New Synagogue to repeat the Sabbath psalm twice. There is no mention of this custom in Sippurim. Though the origin of the tradition remains unknown, some attribute it to this legend. It is not difficult to understand how the subject matter of all these legends fascinated one generation after the next. People have always been intrigued by the occult, but the Jewish people in particular have longed incessantly for a miraculous deliverance from the hostile world in which they have been forced to wander. Sometimes, as after the 30 Years' War, the persecution of the Jews in Eastern Europe drove them, as Steiberger has pointed out, to an increased secret reliance on exorcisms and amulets. At the same time, the belief in spirits and supernatural acts had to be subject to the belief in God's will, since Jewish lore insisted that only God can give select individuals the power to perform miracles, such as creating life from inanimate matter. Religious purity, high erudition, and an intimate knowledge of the divine world are presuppositions of such magical and legendary powers. The man preeminently qualified to handle this role was Rabbi Loew of Prague. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 is next, and I believe it's much shorter. Yes, it's only 12 pages. All right. Until next time, bruv. Goodbye. Goodbye.